upsetting it must be to work tirelessly, pay dues, and get good enough at your profession that you finally make it to WWE, only to be saddled with a rubbish gimmick that you cannot stand. While everyone would love to be a badass champion of the world who defies authority and does whatever they like whenever they like it, obviously not everyone can be so fortunate, and the wacky world of pro wrestling needs characters that, for the people tasked with portraying them, might not be so desirable. Sometimes the gimmick itself might not be inherently awful or anything, but it's still a struggle for the performer doing it because it's so far removed from either what they were expecting to do or what they're comfortable being. Invariably, they will at least give it the old college try because, well, you might only get one shot in the big time and 15 minutes of fame is better than no fame at all, but more often than not, these characters end up being failures. While not ideal by any means, a failed character doesn't always mean the end of the road, and some wrestlers have managed to shake off the stigma of playing a dud to go on to either salvage or resurrect their careers. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE stars who hated their gimmick. Join us. Number 10, Dean Douglas. Not all wrestlers are big, stupid muscleheads who have difficulty tying their shoelaces or stringing a coherent sentence together. I mean, most of them are, obviously, but there are exceptions, and a few grapplers are actually quite bright. Take, for example, Shane Douglas, ECW's franchise, who made a living in the not too terribly smart way of getting hit in the head with chairs and being put through tables. But Douglas was a clever guy, having a couple of master's degree equivalents to his name. At one point, he had even been invited to attend medical school, but declined in order to pursue his wrestling dream. When WWE Creative were tasked with coming up with a character for him in 1995, they fixated on his above-average education and turned him into Dean Douglas, the obnoxiously intelligent, paddle-wielding college dean in powder blue. The former ECW heavyweight champion tried to give himself to the role, but clearly wasn't into it, somewhat dismayed after being a big fish in a small pond and having the creative freedom to do pretty much whatever he wanted. The character was a bomb, and its failure, coupled with Shane's backstage issues with the Clique, meant that Douglas came and went very quickly, the whole experience leaving a bitter taste in the performer's mouth. Number 9, Cowboy Bret Hart. Before fully developing his hitman persona, complete with shades, pink and black gear, and leather jacket, Bret Hart was basically, well, just a wrestler who wrestled. Coming from his father's Stampede wrestling territory and having worked extensively in Japan, Bret didn't have an OTT gimmick when he showed up in mid-80s WWE. A little colourless for New York, perhaps, Vince McMahon decided that he wanted his new Canadian acquisition to have a cowboy gimmick to help him stand out. According to Hart, this would come complete with an electric cowboy hat and a new horse being rode to the ring every single night. The excellence of execution disliked the concept so much that he flat out refused to do it, telling the promoter that, where he came from, if you're going to say you're a cowboy, then you damn well better be a cowboy. As an aside, he had no issues with being billed as Cowboy Bret Hart when he worked for the UK's All-Star Wrestling early in his career. Fortunately, Bret managed to avoid irking the cattlemen of Calgary, instead suggesting that he team up with extended family member Jim Neidhart as the Hart Foundation. The duo, with Jimmy Hart as their manager, were a winning unit, the team catapulting both men to success that they couldn't have imagined when they signed with Titan Sports Inc. Just think how different wrestling history could have been if Bret Hart had become a bone-bending buckaroo instead of the pink and black attack. Number 8, the Stalker. It is sometimes said that the most successful wrestling gimmicks are born when the performer's own personalities are simply dialed up to 11. In order to unearth that, in the past, Vince McMahon would ask a wrestler what they enjoyed doing, what other life experience they had, and then tried to mold their character based on that information. So when he sat down with Barry Windham and the big man from Sweetwater, Texas told him that he enjoyed outdoor pursuits like camping, hunting, and fishing, it naturally evolved into, well, this. What was supposed to be a guy who was adept at catching prey and surviving the wilds turned into a slightly deranged ex-jungle commando. The character was hyped via a series of unsettling vignettes, but by the time Windham started working matches as the Stalker on TV, it was more toned down and fan-friendly. Barry himself wasn't a fan of the role, especially the face paint and camouflage gear, which was a million miles from the look he was used to having. It was a far cry from the dynamic performer who had captivated NWA fans years earlier, but to be fair, Windham was also more injured, heavier, and less motivated during this run, something that was reflected in his performances as the Stalker. The character was scrapped after just a few months, and Barry became one of the new Blackjacks, which is surely the only time that would be considered an upgrade. Number 7, The Goodfather. It took Charles Wright years, as well as a couple of departures and returns, to find the gimmick that turned him into a true superstar. The Hall of Famers started as Papa Shango, came back as Karma the Supreme Fighting Machine, and then segued into a role in the impressive Nation of Domination, but it was as fun-loving pimp The Godfather that he truly caught on. In the freewheeling attitude era, The Godfather was one of the most over acts on the show, helped in no small part by the convoy of flesh-bearing totties that accompanied him to his matches. And Wright had an absolute blast with the persona, which, as the owner of a Las Vegas strip club who liked to dabble in a bit of the green stuff, was not too far removed from reality. Unfortunately though, the pesky Parents Television Council weren't such big fans and lobbied hard to get the character axed from WWE TV. In the end, they were successful. Wright was rechristened The Goodfather and put into the PTC mocking group Right to Censor. And boy did he hate it, threatening to quit the company rather than do the bit, which is when Vince McMahon made him a tag team champion in order to convince him to stay. After the RTC disbanded, The Godfather came back, but as a neutered version that the audience didn't take too strongly. Number 6, Rhythm and Blues Greg Valentine. For a select few wrestlers, the best gimmick is having no gimmick at all. It certainly worked for Greg Valentine anyway, who made his name as a hard-nosed, no-nonsense second-generation bruiser in black trunks and boots. The glitziest it ever got for Valentine was his nickname, the Hammer, because he would smash you in the face with the force of one, and a few sequins on his traditional wrestling robe. In a bid to repackage him, WWE teamed Greg up with the Honky Tonk Man in the Rhythm and Blues tag team, with Valentine eventually dyeing his hair black, donning shades, and carrying a guitar to the ring too. The grizzled Killjoy did so begrudgingly and let everyone know that he did not like the gimmick. The team name was coined by Rick Rude, while Valentine's appearance change was suggested by commentator Jesse Ventura to Vince McMahon. It took months of convincing for the Hammer to ditch the blonde, by which point the powers that be had lost interest and turned their attentions instead to shiny new toy, the Legion of Doom. Honky left, scrapping a planned feud between the former partners, and Valentine has since stated in retrospect that while he didn't enjoy doing it, he wishes that he had committed to the part a lot more. Number 5, Saba Simba. It's always weird when WWE brings back an established talent that everyone knows and tries to put a totally outlandish gimmick on them. While yes, sometimes a performer needs a new coat of paint to freshen their act up, it can be a hard thing for, especially long-term fans, to accept. Tony Atlas was well known from his time teaming with Rocky Johnson, the Soul Patrol being the first black tag team champions in WWE history. Sadly, the vet had fallen on hard times and was actually homeless when Vince McMahon reached out for an improbable return in 1990. He wasn't going to be brought back as Mr. USA, however, but a Ugandan tribe warrior named Saba Simba. While Atlas's part was acknowledged, on commentary, McMahon explained the change by claiming that he had rediscovered his roots. Though Tony was happy for the paycheck, he didn't like the gimmick, believing it to be a stereotype and not something that he could do properly since, you know, he wasn't an actual Ugandan tribe warrior. He didn't know the rituals, the dances, or anything about the culture really, and basically played the character for the money, which allowed him to re-enroll in school and not rely totally on wrestling once it came to an end. Number 4, Kizarny. Sizumtizimes a Rizesla Wizil Tizaka Gizimik to... Actually, no. Sorry, I can't do this for the whole time I have to talk about Kizarny, which really is punishment enough in itself. Kizarny is Carney for, well, Carney. Isn't that clever? Pitched to the journeyman Sin Bodhi from Vince McMahon himself, Kizarny was a carnival worker who spoke the language that used to populate wrestling locker rooms across the United States. The introductory vignettes were well produced and intriguing, but once he debuted on SmackDown, it all went to hell. He defeated MVP in his first match, was eliminated from a battle royal in another, and, well, that was it for Kizarny's WWE Kizarny. Bodhi himself liked the carnival worker aspect of it, but disliked the name and the fact that the gimmick would mean that he would have to speak in Carney all the time in order to maintain kayfabe. I guess it was lucky for him then that the character came and went in the blink of an eye. Bodhi has since said that he believes that Kizarny would have gone further if he had been a heel, but the boss was dead set on him being babyface. And you know what? Vince was right. The best babyfaces are totally the terrifying ones you can't understand when they talk. Jesus. Number 3, the Ringmaster. If somebody came up to me and told me that my gimmick was to be the master of the ring and that I would have the $1 Million Man as my manager, I would ask them to never wake me up from the beautiful dream I'm clearly having. But the Ringmaster was not a winner in the eyes of Steve Austin, who was coming off a run in WCW where he felt that he had been underused. The idea behind the Ringmaster, such as it was basically that he was such a bloody good wrestler. The DiBiase pairing and $1 Million Man garnish were just extras to add colour to a bland concept. WWE gave him the gimmick because they felt that he was simply a good mechanic, which is to say a very good and accomplished worker, but one lacking in charisma. Oh, you poor, poor fools. Austin knew the gimmick was a stinker, and fearing that his WWE career was going to go the same way as his WCW one, crafted a new identity called Stone Cold Steve Austin, after watching a documentary on Mafia hitman, the ruthless Richard Kuklinski, who was nicknamed the Iceman. Naturally, WWE wanted to ruin that one too, with name suggestions like Fang McFrost, but the Texas Rattlesnake persevered and laughed all the way to the bank. Number 2, Johnny Polo. Considering just how good and successful the Raven character was, it's amazing just how different Scott Levy's wrestling gimmicks before he went all grunge really were. To be fair, the wrestling landscape was much different in the early as opposed to mid-90s, and the boy toy Scotty the Body, followed by the neon-soaked surfer Scotty Flamingo, definitely fit in that landscape. After leaving WCW and joining WWE, Scott was given the Johnny Polo gimmick. Polo was a preppy, rich kid heel manager, no doubt inspired by similar stuck-up brats that Vince McMahon must have encountered living in the affluent Greenwich, Connecticut. Scotty did what he could with the character, and it felt like he did a decent job making it memorable and fun, but that doesn't mean he liked it. And that's because he didn't. It just wasn't him, something that his boss picked up on one day when he told him that he always felt that there was a disconnect when watching him and that he really wasn't Johnny Polo. And that was true, because whenever he wasn't on the clock, Scott would be somebody completely different. He eventually quit WWE, tired of portraying something that he felt no affinity for, moving to ECW and rebranding himself as the tortured soul in black t-shirts and cutoffs. Number 1, Stardust. It was heartening to watch Cody Rhodes' progression in WWE as charted through his various gimmicks. Watching the grandson of a plumber go from generic fiery babyface to legacy member to dashing to Phantom of the Opera villain to a mustachioed Rhodes scholar to an accomplished all-around performer with main event potential, you could see his evolution as a wrestler and knew that whatever he was tasked with doing, he was going to make it good. And then, along came Stardust. Now in theory, undertaking a gimmick that was inspired by his brother dusting Goldust Rhodes' most famous guys in order for the two to feud was not a bad idea per se. But as Cody himself so succinctly put it later on, they made Stardust a pissing space clown. Stardust gave Cody something to do and made him a bit of money, but it was a million miles from where he wanted to be in his career. His heart just wasn't in it, and supposedly his apathetic performances resulted in him moving down the card to the point that he was either jobbed out or otherwise appearing on minor shows like Main Event. Eventually, Cody got so disgruntled with his lot and was so tired of putting on the paint that he asked for his release. Now, with that unsightly neck tattoo, at least he can look stupid on his own terms.